Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about an issue that many of you have no doubt encountered if you've ever tried to make changes to the way you, your child, or your family eats. I know that when my husband and I changed our family's diet to eliminate foods that we were sensitive to and really just to be healthier overall, it brought on many opinions from family members, friends, my kids' teachers, and other people. So, it's challenging enough to deal with managing food choices with our family without the judgment, questions, emotions of other people. But the reality is that our kids do spend time with people outside of our family where food is involved. And this naturally raises questions and opinions from other people. So what's the best way to handle this? How can we stick to our parenting choices with confidence and deal with challenging conversations with people who don't get what we're doing or think that we're doing things wrong? My guest today is family nutrition specialist Jess Sherman. She's going to give us some tips for navigating these uncomfortable situations. Let me tell you a bit about Jess. She's a former teacher turned registered holistic nutritionist and a family health expert, specializing in nutrition for brain health and resilience for kids. Over 10 years, she has worked alongside naturopathic and medical doctors, family counselors and psychologists, occupational therapists, teachers, and parents to bring an understanding of the power of good nutrition, simplicity, and connection into mainstream conversation about children's mental health, learning, and resilience. Her book, Raising Resilience, and her online resources have helped families all over the world improve the lives of their children with learning differences, anxiety, ADHD, autism, and mood disorders, by helping them use food to help kids calm down, learn better, have better sleep, have better poops, enjoy more stable moods, and get over their picky eating. As you can hear from Jess's bio, she and I have many things in common in terms of not only our background, but also how we approach things with kids and families. So Jess, it is a joy to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This is a great topic to tackle, one of my favorites.
It is a great topic because, as we were talking before the show started, I've been there, you've been there. This is sort of the inevitable thing that comes up when families start to think about shifting the way that they eat, or really shifting the way that they do anything related to their kids. Everybody's got opinions. So I think this is a really great challenge to talk about and give people tips around. I'm going to back up a little bit though and start with you sharing just a bit about your story of how you came to be doing this work, because as I did, you started out, as a teacher working with kids that way, and then really morphed into, this role as a nutrition specialist. So tell us a little bit about that journey for you.
Yeah. I started as a teacher, and I actually started in experiential education, which is kind of like a subcategory, I guess you would call it. When I studied education, it was all about getting kids moving and getting them doing stuff and having experiences, immersing them in experiences. And when I look back on it now, I think I was drawn to that type of education just because I've always been drawn to understanding how people develop and how they become who they are, how they become their best self. So it's really been rooted, my whole education journey and now my nutrition journey is really rooted in kind of self-development. And so I was working in the classroom, and I was working with experiential education in the classroom. And I actually wrote my master's thesis on the contradictions between how, what we know about experience and development and what we expect of kids in the classroom, and the tension between the two was really interesting to me. But what I was noticing is that, more kids were struggling than weren't struggling. And they were either struggling with something physical like allergies or asthma or acne or something like that, or they were struggling with something, mood related or anxiety or learning related. And it was really to the point, like so many kids were on medication. There were so many IEPs, there were, so many referrals out to doctors. And I got really, our only recourse as teachers when someone was struggling was to bring in the medical world. which is fine. And if it was a physical thing, it would be, you know, you should see your doctor about this. And if it was a mental, emotional learning thing, it was, you should see the psychologist or the psychiatrist about it, like head people. And I just felt like something was missing. You know, we were doing so many wonderful things, education-wise, and then we would, you know, get all these diagnoses. And so I took a sabbatical and started. It's interesting to me now that when I took a sabbatical, I didn't go into spec ed. Like, I didn't want more education tools. I went into holistic nutrition and health because I felt like there was some piece there missing. And that's when I learned that, yeah, you know what, dealing with this paradigm, I guess, that we're in, where the body and the brain are not considered as co-workers, was just doing our kids a disservice. So I started learning that the brain and the body actually work together, and it's all part of the same ecosystem. And when you improve health in one, you improve health in the other, and like bi-directionally. So that's what I started teaching parents, was how they can consider their whole child, whether it's something physical or something neurological, to improve their health. And the number one tool we have for that is food. So that's what I do now, is I coach parents on how to make practical food changes to improve the health of the body, so that the body and the brain both work better.
It's great. And I want to mention too, just because I think this is important for our listeners to know, you also along the way became a mom yourself. You have children. And the reason I think that's really relevant is because there are, you know, certain experts on these things, or people who talk about these things, who don't have children, who haven't lived this on the personal side to know what it's actually like to try to change the food, you know, plan for a family, or, you know, to what we're talking about today, what it's like to deal with grandparents or, you know, teachers or whatever around some of these things. So I want our listeners to understand that not only are you, you know, experienced from the professional side of this, but also there's a personal component to this as well. You have experienced this and had to navigate this yourself, right?
Yeah, and one thing I learned early on, and well, not actually that early on, it actually came to me a little bit as I was deep into, you know, coaching around nutrition, that, you know, when we're changing your own health is one thing, and we all know how hard that is, to like start a new exercise routine or change your diet or whatever. But changing the health of another person is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah.
Especially when that person is your child, for a couple of reasons. First, because we are so emotionally attached to the outcome. And second, because they're a child and they are developing not only their bodies, but they're developing their relationship with the world, their relationship with themselves, their relationship with food, their relationship with you. And so we really need to tread carefully when we're talking about kids. So I root all, and again, this is something that you and I have in common, I root all of my nutrition work in the attachment parenting model,
right?
Because that tells us, you know, the way our kids are developing their relationships is just as important as what they're eating. So we need to consider the two together. And so that makes it very different than some nutrition.
Well, and I think I'm glad that you raised that, because you cannot, in my opinion, and yours as well, you can't separate the two, especially when we're talking about the parent-child dynamics of that. It is not just about being told, here's what you and your child should be eating. Because most people know or have a sense or have, you know, learned a bit about that or been told some of that. The real issue is, how do I do that? How do I make that happen? And that's the bigger piece of it. And that's the case for most of us, even as adults, right? There's very few adults walking around out there who have absolutely no idea what it would mean to eat healthier, right? The problem is not a lack of information or a lack of understanding about what we or our kids should be eating. It's about, how do I do that? And the emotions involved in that. And just, and as we're going to get into today, the emotional dynamics involved with other people who actually aren't in our family, but the fear of people's judgments, their opinions, their reactions to it can keep us from implementing things that we know would be valuable for our kids and our family.
Yeah, and I would add to that and say, like, I think you're totally right that it's not a lack of information. And when it comes to parents, also another kind of specific thing to this group of people is that we usually have too much information.
Yeah.
You know, like when
Excellent
you
point.
start looking,
Yeah.
when you start going down this rabbit hole, you get so much information, and so we get, and that paralyzes you.
Mhm.
So I've spent considerable amount of time translating information into practical application because we're busy. Like we just want to know, like,
Yeah.
what do I do? What do I put on my table? And the other really important thing is that, you know, what we just talked about this importance of relationship and conversation about this stuff, is that is often a game ender, or
Mhm.
what's the word, you know,
Yeah.
like a deal breaker,
Yep.
because parents will say, oh, it's just too stressful.
Yep.
It's you know, it's causing stress between like the two parents, or it's causing stress between the kids. And that's an instinct, right? Because we know that those attachments are really, really important. And so I think it's instinctual for us to say, oh, if it's interfering with that, then I'm just not going to do it. What I would love to see happen is to say, oh, okay, I see a problem here. I see a barrier, which is what we're going to get into. We need to move through that because this is too important to
Yeah.
turn our backs on.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's dive into the why it's so important. And we don't need to spend a ton of time here because the majority of our listeners have heard me talk ad nauseum, and we've had so many guests on the show, you know, talking about the connection between food and not only physical health and wellness, but also mental health and wellness, how food impacts our kids' mood, behavior, and learning. But I always think it's good for us to hear that again in a new way from a new person. So to get to the why this is important in the first place, can you talk for a minute about that? Why should we be looking at the food that our kids are eating?
Yeah, well, I'll be brief because, like you said, you have so many great resources on this. But the crux of it is that our body works as an interconnected series of systems. They're all connected, and they run on nutrients. I mean, nutrients are the building blocks. The way I break it down for parents is to say, if you want to take a whole body approach to, like, you know, your child's learning or behavior, when it comes to food, there's 3 areas to explore. Is enough food coming in? So are all the building blocks coming in, or do you need some nutritional supplements, or, you know, unpack the nutrition piece, because everything runs. I'm sure you have lots of resources to link people to, but our neurotransmitters, our hormones, everything runs on nutrients, our detox systems, our digestive system. So that's the first thing. The second thing is irritation. Is your child eating something or exposed to something? So something in, on, or around their bodies that is causing extra stress to an already stressed out kid. And how can we alleviate some of that? And the third is digestion, because we know now that the gut and the brain are constantly talking to each other. And food affects what's going on in the microbiome. A lot of things affect what's going on in the microbiome, but food is one of them. Yeah. So if we can get that conversation to be more health promoting, less inflammatory and all that, then the brain's going to work better. So I sort of break it down into those 3 chunks of information. We explore those, and we're going to find all our answers in there somewhere.
It's really a lovely way of breaking that down. It really simplifies it for people. Is there enough of the right things coming in? Does the child have enough of those nutrient building blocks for their brain and body to work with? Are there things that are coming in that are maybe causing problems or irritating or stressing out the brain and the body? And then the digestion, how the gut is working, the balance of the microbiome. That's a really nice sort of set of baskets to put that in, and it simplifies it. To your point earlier about information overwhelm, you know, so much of it just, that gives people some nice boxes or containers to put that in. So I love that. So yes, we need to be looking at what our kids are eating. It's indisputable that food impacts mood, learning, behavior. That's just a fact. So when parents are saying, okay, I'm ready to do this, I want to think about this, I'm ready to make some changes, I think this is important for my child, I'm curious, what's the first thing that you really encourage parents to do or to focus on if they want to change their child's behavior using food?
I'd say the first thing is to develop an unwavering confidence that this matters,
Love
right, in
that.
yourself,
Love
because
that.
it's going to get hard. Any change is hard, right? Like you've been going one way and you've been experiencing one reality for a while, and you're looking at exploring a different option, right? So that's a change.
Yeah.
And anytime there's a change, there's going to be a little, moment of disruption. So you need to know why you're doing this. So if that means some people need more research, some people need to talk to other parents, some people need a coach, some people, already know, right? So just develop, and the way I guide people, it's the very first thing that I do with parents, usually even before they start working with me, but certainly once they do start working with me, we hammer this for a little while. What does your vision of perfect look like? Like, what do you want for your kids and for your family? What kind of dynamic do you want in the home? What kind of relationship do you want with them? What kind of success do you want them to experience? And it's different for everybody. So I get people to write it out, and this is an exercise everyone can do. Write it out in first person as if it's already happened. What's your vision for your family's health? And this is something that we just don't take. It gets lost, right? We never really talk about this. And once I started recognizing it, I was like, my husband and I never really talked about the way we want to set up the culture in our family. And luckily we're on the same page, but I know a lot of parents, they don't talk about it. And so when something happens, like you get a diagnosis or you have a troublesome kid or whatever, all of a sudden there's like, oh, we actually don't see this the same way. So that's a challenging conversation you're going to have as a team.
Well, and that idea of, if we don't know where we're going, how do we know how to even map a path to get there? How do we know when we've arrived? So I like this idea of sort of articulating from the start, what do we want this to look like?
Yeah. And when you're doing this, just another little tip for people, when you're creating your vision, don't worry about the how just yet, right? Because you don't, and this is one of the problems with these conversations, is that, you enter into a conversation with somebody and they throw all kinds of questions at you. Well, I saw this research, or I read this article, and all of a sudden you're just like, I don't know, right? And so there's this expectation that if you want to change something, you need to be an expert in it before you can change it. Mm-hmm. That's not true, right? You don't have to be an expert in parenting or an expert in nutrition or an expert in psychology or whatever to try something. So detach from the how. This is going to be an experiment. If you want to accelerate the process, then, work with somebody who can help you with that. But something you can do on your own. But you do need to know where you want to be. You don't necessarily need to know how you're going to get there. Those pieces will fill in.
So I want to just back up to what you said initially when I asked the question, because that is like a nice, like quotable, like take home piece that I said, what's the first thing you have people do? And you didn't rattle off, well, start reducing sugar and, all these things. You said, have an unwavering confidence that changing the way your kid eats matters. You started with this like us piece, right? Like this starts with us going, this matters, this is important to me, and I don't necessarily know how exactly I'm going to do this, but this matters, and I'm going to proceed from there. And I think that's really a powerful, powerful thing for people to latch onto. Yeah,
and your kids will feel that. Mm-hmm. If you go into this kind of wishy-washy saying, well, I heard that gluten is not a good thing, we're going to try taking it out for a while and see what happens. Your kids will be all over you, right? But if you go in and you're just like, no, this is what we're doing. I'm doing it. You're doing it. Dad's doing it. Brother's doing it. We want to up-level our health, and we're going to give this a go. Give it a time frame too. That really helps as well. Give it a time frame. We're going to do this for 4 weeks. See what happens,
Well, in that piece too, I love what you said about you don't have to be an expert, because I think what you said there just throws so many people. They feel like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then the first time they share something with grandma or their sister or the kid's teacher or whatever, and somebody says, well, I read that article in the paper, several months ago about how, that's really not a good thing. They go, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an expert. What if I'm doing something bad? And they just kind of fold with it. And so I love that you just shined a spotlight right on that, because we've all experienced that. And I'll tell you, I have, as a professional with advanced degrees in these things, with published research, I still will have these moments when someone will come at me with something and I'm like, oh, but is that really, okay, is that really the right thing? So I think just to say, yes, this happens to all of us, and we need to have some tools within ourselves to work through that.
Yeah, and I think good response, just to bring it to something real practical, a good response for that kind of challenge would be, this is my decision. I'm doing it for 4 weeks, and this is what we're doing. Like, you don't have to get into, well, research shows that blah, 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 blah. You don't have to go there. Like, you don't need to pretend to be an expert unless you are. And if you're comfortable going there, what I'd suggest is, let's say it's a teacher, or I don't know, it could be anyone. First thing is, this is what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I would appreciate your support. Mm-hmm. And the second, if you feel comfortable, another level you could go is set a time to talk about it, and to be like, you know what, I actually do know quite a lot about this, and I know I have very good reasons for doing that. It's not really the time to get into it right now, but can we make an appointment? Like maybe next Wednesday after school, let's chat about it so you can really know what I'm doing. If you're comfortable. Don't go there if you're just experimenting, because don't put that pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
But if you are, well steeped in the research and you know why you're doing what you're doing, then by all means, bring them on board.
So first tip for handling those kinds of challenges is to just be clear about, this is what we're doing. And that kind of sets the tone for, I'm not really interested in your opinion. I don't really want to get into a debate or discussion, right? Because so often that's what we fear. That's what makes us uncomfortable, is we're going to get dragged into this drama around trying to defend our position, or, somebody telling us that we're wrong, particularly someone that we maybe feel or look at as sort of an authority figure, maybe our own parent, the child's grandparent or the teacher or whatever. We can be concerned that we're going to get dragged into arguments or contentious debates about it. And I love what you're saying is, no, we don't have to invite that. We can just be clear about, this is what we're doing, and this is the amount of time we're doing it for. And I would appreciate your support. That's a really nice way of approaching that.
And it can be anything parenting too. It goes beyond food, right? You want to try a different discipline style, or you want to try a different homework agenda or something like that. Yeah. You're a parent. And I think, yes, you have a team, right? You've got the teachers and the doctors and the therapists and the whatever other parents. You've got people on your parenting team. But I do feel like, we can parent. I really just want people to parent from a place of confidence. Mm-hmm. Find the people to put the people on your team that help you with your confidence. Mm-hmm. And you can say no to the others. So yeah, we need to find that confidence.
So let's get into some other tips around challenging conversations that come up. Maybe it's, as you mentioned earlier, a situation where partners or spouses are not on the same page, and there's some, concern there, or getting our kids, having challenging conversations with our kids, or, we've been talking about teachers. So what are some other tips for navigating that?
So I have some real concrete tips. Awesome. That I think will help. The first is the thing you don't want is conflict. You don't want conflict around this. Right. I mean, everybody's going to lose out when this blows up into an explosion. Right. So if you feel that coming on, someone's challenging you and attacking you, and you feel that conflict coming on, best thing I think you can do is create a time to talk about it. Not engage in it right then and there, because right then and there, you're getting all hot and flustered, you're getting all angry. It's just going to turn into, you're not quite sure what's going to come out of your mouth. Like, you don't have time to pause and express yourself the way you want to. So the best thing you could do would be like, listen, you clearly have some strong opinions. You're on my parenting team because you're the dad, or you're the grandma, or you're the teacher, or whatever. So it's really important that we have this conversation, but I can't have it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So set a container and an expectation about when you are going to have that conversation, so that you can collect your thoughts. Right? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think that right there, a lot of people went, oh, okay, I could handle that if I don't have to feel like put on the spot or thrown off in the moment, to give ourselves permission to pause, to think about it, and then to approach it at another time. Great.
Yeah. So the other thing that I think really helps is that often when people challenge you, it's because they feel in some way attacked.
Yeah.
Right? They feel in some way like they're not doing a good enough job, they're doing something wrong. And so it comes across as an attack.
Mm-hmm.
So look for that. And when you open up this conversation, it's very helpful to lead from a place of appreciation. And say, listen, you are a wonderful teacher. I love what you did here, X, Y. If you can have practical, like real examples, bring them up. Or you've been an awesome dad. I love how, the other day you made time for, Sally because she had a really tough day. Something appreciative, and to just pull them into the conversation that way, so that they don't feel, it kind of diffuses the you're not doing a good enough job, right? So
well, because it's interesting. I think you're so right. The defensiveness and to, maybe give an example that people can relate to outside of their kids. That's like the issues you run into with anyone as an adult who decides to change their eating or exercise habits, right? We know from the research that if they try to do that in isolation without a support network, that is a real fail most of the time, because other people feel their own guilt, their own shame, their own stuff around. When you're eating healthier, you're shining a spotlight for me on the things that I know that I need to change, or maybe I'm not willing to face, and that makes me uncomfortable. So I like it better when you go out to eat with me and, have 2 glasses of wine and eat the cake for dessert and whatever, then I don't have to face my own stuff, right? When you're sitting there eating a salad and lean protein and, taking a pass on dessert, that makes me uncomfortable. And I think a lot of adults can relate to that. And that's really the same thing that's going on here with our kids, right? When you say people feel attacked, it's sort of like shining a spotlight for them. Not that we mean to do that, but that's how they're perceiving it. Like, oh, maybe I should be thinking about what I'm feeding my own kids, right?
Yeah, and I see this so often between parents.
Yeah.
Whether they're living together or not. Definitely, like more so when they're not living together. Right. But even when they're living under the same roof, it shines a spotlight. I mean, this parenting gig, it is the most intense personal development journey that you'll ever be on, if you choose to look at it that way, right? It can, and it's beautiful in that way, because our kids are just master reflectors, right? You're just like, oh, and that can really get our defenses up. But if you let them teach you, man, it's a journey and a half. But yeah, it brings up a lot of baggage.
So I love that tip around lead with appreciation. Make the person that you're having the conversation with feel like you do appreciate them. There are things they're doing well. That tends to cut down then on maybe the instinct to have a defensive reaction when you start talking about the food, right?
Yeah. And then another piece that I think is helpful, and it kind of goes along with that last one, is most people don't like to be schooled. They don't like to be taught.
Yeah.
So, in coming out with all these facts, like this, omega-3s are important for the brain, and so our kids should be on fish oil. Like fact. A lot of people will go right back into defensive zone. Like they were just appreciated and that's all great, but now you're just like, but we're not doing this and this and this. So just watch yourself for that. You might know lots of facts, but just, hear it from their perspective. And this is something we can also do with our kids. Like, when you're barking at your kids, like how does that land on them?
Sure.
So just being mindful of your language around, are you teaching or are you sharing something that you read? You know, are you pretending to be an expert in, you know, all of these things, or are you sharing an article that you found interesting? That can really soften things as well. Just again, keeping this a conversation rather than me telling you what we're going to do next.
Yeah.
Which is contradicts what I said earlier. Like at the very beginning, yes, you need to stay confident, be like, yeah, this is what we're doing. But then when it comes, like that was because you were feeling attacked and you needed to own your authority. Now we're into the conversation part where, you know, you can really pull in, you know, these sort of gentler, softer communication strategies, I guess.
So tone and the approach makes a difference, is what you're saying, in whether these conversations are sort of a setup for conflict or argument, or if it's an opportunity for just sort of sharing and having some supportive dialogue. How we approach it in terms of our tone and our perspective makes a big difference.
It does. Yeah, I find that it really does, because it so quickly becomes, like we were just talking about, it so quickly gets shifted to being about us as parents, where we're not doing what we should be doing, which is like, I wish that could just get banished. Mom guilt, dad guilt, like it does not serve us.
Right.
What serves us is to stick to the facts. Like, listen, we've got a kid who's struggling with X, Y, and Z. We've tried A, B, C, and it's not working. Let's try W, X, Y. You know, like, keep it about your child's well-being, I guess is another piece of this puzzle. Keeping it about your child's well-being and just constantly redirecting it. Because if it turns into about us, we need to take that elsewhere, right? If I all of a sudden recognize that, oh my gosh, and this isn't a food example, but, you know, sometimes we'll realize that, oh my gosh, I'm snapping at my kid all the time. I'm like yelling. Why is this such a trigger for me? That's my own stuff. I need to go for a walk and contemplate and journal and figure that out. What matters most is that I don't snap at my kid, and I can, you know, maintain that relationship. So does that make sense? I kind of feel like I went on a bit of a tangent, but do you see what I'm getting at?
Absolutely. And I think it's that piece about keeping it about the child's health and wellness. This is why we're doing this. This isn't an indictment of, you know, how you parent or what you serve in your classroom, or it's not about you or about me. This is about the child and bringing it back there and keeping our stuff out of it, right?
Yeah.
So what about ideas for approaching it, like when the child is saying, you know, I don't want to do this. This is dumb. Like when we're concerned about our child's opinion, or, you know, that can cause us to waver in our confidence too. Like, oh, I don't want my child to be unhappy, or this is going to cause unrest or some issues. What are some tips there? Because that inevitably will happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To meet a kid who's like, oh, you know what, Mom, I'm so glad you raised the issue of me not eating, you know, as many vegetables and, you know, not having gluten. And I'm really glad you brought that up. I've been meaning to talk to you about that, right? That's never how that goes.
It's not, you know, when that part comes in though, and I have seen this in really miraculous ways, is when kids start to feel a difference.
Yes, for sure.
Then they're just like,
yep,
maybe it's the sugar.
Yep.
You know, I've had kids as young as like 4 years old say, Mama, I don't think I should eat that because it's not going to make me feel good.
Yep.
Like, it's miraculous when it happens. Or I've also seen kids be like, we don't have enough vegetables on the table. Like, I've literally, it sounds ridiculous, but I have literally seen that happen. And it happens when kids start to feel the difference in their bodies, and they start to experience something different. And when the parent can then make for them that connection. Yeah. Right. So that's our job. So it is not our job to keep our kids happy. I think that's a trap we always fall into. Yep. I tell my kids, it's my job to keep you healthy and safe until you're able to do that yourself. Yeah. That's it, right? So until you can show me that you can make healthy and safe decisions, that you can keep yourself healthy and safe, I'm going to take that job on because that's my job. That's my role. And then when they make a decision that is not healthy or safe, I can be like, okay, you're clearly not ready to do that yet. And this is really helpful when you get into the teen years.
Yeah.
They have to show you that. They have to demonstrate capability in order for you to hand over the reins. But at the same time, like, we can't expect them to make decisions that are healthy and safe if we don't teach them how to do that.
Yeah.
There's no reason they would know why vegetables are important if we don't teach them. There's no reason for them to know why sugar is so bad for their brain if we don't teach them.
Right. So this confidence applies to how we talk about it with them too, not just our interactions with our partner or with other adults, but this confidence with our kids. As you were saying before, they sense if we're wavering, right? So even if we think that they're going to be unhappy with it or whatever, to still have the confidence of saying, this is what we're doing for this amount of time, and to just move forward with it, even if they want to argue, negotiate, whatever, right?
Yeah. And to know what you're looking for, right? So that you can start to draw some conclusions, because it might not be that, oh, look, the tantrums disappeared.
Right.
It might be much more subtle than that. It might be, oh, they're sleeping better. Or, oh, they're pooping better. Oh, their skin cleared up, right? So know what you're looking for. And here's just another little tip I'll throw out there for people is that, generally speaking, this is very general, but I like to boil things down into simple. Look at the skin, the bowels, and the behavior.
Yep.
Right? That's usually when you start to make diet changes or, changes around the home. That's where, and look at all three: skin, bowel, and behavior. And with behavior, that includes sleep.
Yeah, right.
Right. So know what you're looking for, and be the one who can start to this. I think this came from my experiential education background, which is, with experiential ed, we were always about you immerse a child in an experience and facilitate their understanding of what that experience means.
Yeah.
So as facilitators, they can draw some of their own conclusions, but we can also help them, distill meaning out of an experience. And so that's what you can do as parents is, interesting. You pooped 3 times today when usually you don't poop every day.
Yep.
Interesting. Not as a schooling thing, but just as a curiosity.
Right. And even like with older kids, I'll say, oh, what are you noticing? Or, boy, you just had that interaction. Did you notice anything different about that? Often they do notice it. I mean, I know that with my own kids. I know that with kids in the clinic. And I love what you're talking about with giving them the experience, which is up to us to do. That's the piece of us having the confidence to say, this is the experience we're going to have. We're going to try doing X, Y, or Z, for 4 weeks. And then allowing them, facilitating their discovery along the way of how that is for them and what they experience with that. It's a really powerful process. And to me, it comes at it from more of a curious point of view, as opposed to like a punitive or whatever, because so often that's how kids and adults immediately internalize that, right? You're taking things away from me. You're making everything hard. You're saying that I'm bad or that the things I eat are bad. And it's more about just getting curious, I think, about how these dots connect and how our bodies and our brains are working. And that's a much more supportive and beneficial way to go through the process, as opposed to you're taking everything away.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a couple things in there I'd love to pull out. One is that my kids have taught me, and my students taught me this too. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks when I had kids, that, if in the response, when you have an experience, so let's say, a child has tummy pain and then they poo, and then their tummy pain is gone.
Yeah.
Instead of me saying, oh, well, that's because you were bummed up in your lower colon and because the microbes were doing this or that. If me just saying, interesting. It is so much more powerful, because things will, and my kids have done this, like 2 days later, they'll be like, hey, you know what, Mom? I think when I poo, my tummy doesn't hurt. Like, oh, really? Interesting. Right? It's so much more powerful. Where if I was to teach them what's going on with their gut,
right,
shut down. right?
When kids make, for adults too, but especially with children, when they connect the dots, when they make the discovery for themselves, so much more powerful than when we try to tell them. So I love that you're commenting on that. Yes.
Yeah, you said something else too I'd love to pick up on. Is It was something about, I can't remember what you said now, but it was something about nourishing, like paying attention to what we're eating rather than what we're taking out.
Right.
And that is such a key point. And it's something that it's become like a cornerstone of how I work with parents, is that we always start with what are we eating versus what are we taking out. And this leads in, this connects with that conversation we were just having about challenging conversations. They're very challenging when you're talking about taking stuff out of someone's diet. They're much more challenging than when you're talking about putting stuff in a child's diet.
Right.
So the conversation of like, listen, I think we should try eating more vegetables at dinner. Let's maybe put 3 choices out and make sure that the kids try at least one of them. That is a much easier thing to agree on than we're going to take sugar out of our home.
Right. Yeah.
So we always start with how are we nourishing our kids? There are, I mentioned at the start, there are irritants. There are lots of irritants that are causing stress to the body. So at some point, it's worth exploring that. But it's very, very rarely where I start.
Right. When it's because that's the harder piece of it, and there's so much more judgment on the part of everybody around that, right? And so even with those challenging conversations with extended family members, friends, school people, whatever, to be able to focus around, here's what we are eating. Here's all the things that my child is still eating, or here's the new things that we're eating. That often, I think, too, takes people out of this punitive or defensive sort of posture and talks about, well, here's all the things that we can do. Here's all the things that it is okay for my child to eat at your house. Here are all the things that we can do for classroom treats, and focusing on the what we can do, as opposed to people sort of, get overwhelmed or defensive when we talk about what we're not going to do. So I like that too, to focus on what we can do, what we are going to do, what is included in the food plan.
Yeah, it's a whole lot easier. And the whole exclusion piece too, that's where you get gaslighted because of all the research, right? Because this study said sugar's okay. This study said it's not. This study said gluten's okay. This study said it's not. So I've got lots on my blog about that, but you will be challenged for sure when you suggest you're going to take something out of your child's diet. You will probably not be challenged when you focus on what you're putting in your child's diet.
Yeah. So an easier place to start. I love that. As we wrap up, any other tips or thoughts that we didn't get to that you want to make sure to share around this idea of supporting people with challenging conversations?
Well, I think really maybe just leaving on the note that this will happen. Like, this is a part of the journey. Having these challenging conversations is a part of the journey. I can't really imagine it not, because it's a change, right? And best case scenario is that you have everybody in your child's sphere of influence on board with what you're doing. I mean, that's awesome. And if you can, I definitely see faster, deeper progress when that is the case.
Yeah.
Second best case scenario is they will tolerate it. like the people around you don't quite understand it and think you're a little nuts, but they'll tolerate it and they'll do the best they can to support you.
Yeah.
If you're in that third category, which is you are a lone wolf trying to scream from the rooftops that this matters and everybody around you is sabotaging your efforts, that's a very, it's a very challenging. Challenging isn't even the strong enough word. It's a challenging place to be.
Yeah.
So if you're there, you need some support, because if you find yourself saying, and I get these emails a lot, I know that this matters. I know that food matters. I know there is something going on with my child's brain that is food related, or their gut. But everybody is sabotaging me left, right, and center. Then you can't make changes from that place. It's going to be hitting your head against the wall. So you're going to have some of these really challenging conversations. And I hope that some of the tips in here helped, some, practical ways to have those conversations, because like I said at the start, like this matters so much. I would love for us to get to a point where it's just the norm. Right. As soon as a child struggles or starts to struggle, it's like, what are they eating? How are they eating? How are they connecting? Are they eating something that's irritating them? What's going on in the gut? Like the research is in, right? And we have, there's no reason that we shouldn't be doing that kind of an assessment on kids, but reality is that, you have to look for it if you want it.
Well, I think these tips have been really helpful and give people some practical things that they can take into these conversations or some ways of thinking about it. So that's awesome. And I know that you have a website filled with resources for families. You mentioned a couple blog articles. I know you've got videos, you've got some handouts, just all kinds of things. So I want to make sure that people know where they can find out more about your work, where they can access these resources.
So a couple different ways. My blog is at jesssherman.com. So that's 3 S's in a row, jesssherman.com. So there's some, and if you search the blog for family, you'll find a couple of blog posts and videos just on this topic. I also, because this is such a big stumbling block for parents, a couple of years ago, I really tackled it and did a bunch of Facebook Lives on it and stuff. And I wrote a summary. Yeah. So that you can find that at jesssherman.com/family. And it's just a summary, like a literally script that you can modify to your own, reality. Some talking points, some things to look out for these conversations, because this will stop your project dead in its tracks. And then the third place you can find me is in our Facebook community, which is a free community. It's raisingresiliencecommunity.com is where you'll find us. And that's just, a place to get curious about, no matter what stage you're at with this. It's parents who want to up-level their children's health. A lot of them are struggling with neurodevelopment or anxiety or learning issues. Some of them aren't. Some are just, exploring food and nourishment, and but that's where we're having our conversations.
Love it. And the book, Raising Resilience, is available where?
Yeah, raisingresilience.ca. Right. is my book, which is called Raising Resilience.
Yeah, an awesome resource, and available where books are sold too. So fantastic. Jess, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk with me today. Really, really great information and helpful tips. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening to this episode. We'll see you back here next time.